Hey folks, and welcome to Truck King. Right now in this video, we want to talk to you about the big three diesel engines. Those, of course, are Cummins, Powerstroke, and Duramax. And we're going to dive into a whole bunch of things, but one of the reasons we're doing this is because Dad still currently owns two of these engines. So Dad, what are we going to talk about, and what do you hope to get out of this conversation?
There's always an argument between guys about gas versus diesel in terms of, what's more cost effective, what's going to last longer, diesel. But however, at the beginning, you know that you're paying sometimes $8, $9, $10,000 premium to get into the diesel. So that single point alone, is it worth it? Is part of what we need to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that, the history of these engines, and a whole bunch more. So stay tuned.
So the thing that has to be stated right off the bat is that diesel engines in heavy-duty pickup trucks have one singular purpose, and that is to tow a lot of weight. If you're not towing, I can't imagine why you would want to spend that extra money on the diesel and everything else that goes along with it. However, if you do tow, then you will know the difference between the gas and the diesel primarily is torque. And how that torque is delivered. It makes the difference between having to go up a hill with your four ways on in the gas motor versus accelerating uphill with a diesel engine. So, having said that, let's take a look at those engines. Now, first off, I've owned my Ram 2500 for 3 years with the 6.7 Cummins. Now, Cummins and Ram probably have the most famous cooperation or relationship.
The longest as well.
Absolutely. It started in 1989 with a 5.9 liter Cummins diesel, which was noisy, belched black smoke, and produced 190 horsepower. However, incredibly durable. There are still 5.9s running around today, way more than 30 years later. So next to the party was Ford with their Powerstroke in 1995. Now, same thing, little lesser known, is they went to International / Navistar and requisitioned their 7.3 liter engine and shoehorned that into their trucks. And quite honestly, that first engine, which was basically a bus engine, again, low horsepower, little over 200 horsepower, but you know what? The thing lasted, and it ran, and it ran, and it ran, and there are still guys running 7.3s today. If you want, you can find a whole bunch of trucks that went to the scrapyard because of the body, not because of the engine. You can pull those out, still get them going. So now, as far as General Motors is concerned, they were later to the party. They had some diesels before the year 2000. However, they'd probably rather forget about those. So in 2000, because they owned a Isuzu, they took some of that technology and then created their own brand new 6.6 right from a white piece of paper.
And it's interesting, Dad, because to me, it was definitely, a marketing exercise. They said, Dodge and Ford have teamed up with these really established diesel makers, and they have these great names. Well, we need a great name too. So, yeah, I think a lot of people assume Duramax maybe is a separate company, but it's not. GM just went ahead, built its own engine, but then that branding, I think, was really important to make sure that the diesel kind of had its own branding separate from the truck, like the other brands, right?
Yeah. In addition to which, Duramax is the only one that basically created a V8 diesel engine, 6.6 liter displacement, and hasn't changed it.
Just straight till today.
Exactly, other than generational updates. Whereas with Ford, with Cummins, there have been several iterations. In addition to which, with Ford, we also had the 6-liter Powerstroke, which is another engine that came out of Navistar, which Ford would very much like to forget about. And frankly, eventually caused their split. So, since 2011, though, Ford has built its very own Powerstroke down in Mexico. So let's look at some of the things that have changed over that time period. So, for instance, with the Duramax back in 2005, we had 310 horsepower, 590 pound-feet of torque, and this was running a 4-speed transmission. Whereas in 2024, that 6.6 liter Duramax is now up to 470 horsepower, 975 pound-feet of torque, and it's running a 10-speed transmission. So there's a lot to be said for evolution as time goes by, and that's what we have now. Now that pretty much falls into line with some of the other brands. So in the case of the Powerstroke, we go back to the Navistar years, and you're looking at 215 horsepower, 400 and change pound-feet of torque, whereas with Ford today, you've got well over 500 horsepower, and they easily eclipse 1,000 pound-feet of torque.
It's really insane, the power numbers we have gotten to, and they've all doubled, right? Horsepower has doubled, and then torque has more than doubled from when those original diesel engines came out. And so has capability, right? There's no doubt that tow ratings have also gone up to match these new numbers, but I always do come back to one kind of question, Dad, which is just, are we in an age of too much power now? Because when those engines first came out in the 90s and early 2000s, they were still hauling big loads. They were capable. It's just that you were going a little bit slower. So I don't know if we're in an age of too much power, but there's no doubt in my mind that it's disconnected what customers want and then the horsepower wars that went on in Detroit with these diesels. Actually, I think we should call them the torque wars for these diesels. The brands just, they got to keep up with each other. So regardless of what people are saying, they just keep on getting more and more and more. And I'm curious as to when this ends or if it ever does.
Yeah, when we look back in history, the thing that everybody always forgets is you can't look at what the performance was at the time with the mind that you had at the time. In other words, you weren't upset about the way the truck was hauling because there was nothing to compare to.
Sure.
So, but there's no doubt that the marketing people, the engineers said we can do a little better, we can do a little better, and as new stuff came out, people jumped on it. Now, today, do we need as much power as we have? Probably not. Because it's really getting to a point where, like, how fast off the line do you really want to get going with 30,000 pounds?
Yeah, that's fair. And yeah, I mean, the Ford Super Duty is the example that we pull up because they eclipsed 40,000 pounds of max tow in a Super Duty, which if you're doing that regularly, you should probably step up to a medium duty truck, maybe even a full-size big rig. So yes, we're now in the age where the power's gotten so big that you're blending these categories even more of, the consumer-focused trucks versus the business and fleet-focused trucks.
Well, to give you just a little bit of an example, in the early 80s, when I was driving a Freightliner, my Cat engine was putting out 350 horsepower and just a little over 400 pound-feet of torque.
Right, and it was doing fine, hauling heavy loads of steel.
It helped that it had 21 gears.
Fair enough, gearing's important. So this is a long way of just saying we are definitely in an age where if you want power, it is there. You will not be disappointed by any of these diesels. I just wish maybe we'd get a lower power option and then they wouldn't charge us as much for it. Because that's also, like you mentioned off the top, all of these diesels can be $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 upgrades over the base engines in these trucks.
So I just want to talk a little bit about reliability. That is the cornerstone to diesel ownership. It's what we want. Generally speaking, if you're buying a diesel, you're a high miler. You're some guy that's going to put a lot of wear and tear on your truck, particularly, as I said, high mileage. So you want an engine that's going to last. Now, it's interesting, if I go back into history, for instance, with Cummins, there's a company that started in 1919. And yes, there was a Mr. Cummins. And he was a mechanic who really figured that Rudolph Diesel had it right. So he built his own diesel engine and he went out there to prove that it would be superior to gasoline in terms of performance, and if not so much performance, but certainly in endurance. In 1931, he took one of his engines out to Indianapolis and he ran it for 13,535 non-stop miles. And by 1940, that same engine, now dubbed the Model H, was the very first engine offered in North America with a 100,000-mile warranty. That's 1940. So, it was proven technology. Yeah, it was slow, it was oily, it was smelly, it was all those other things. But man, this thing, they were sure that you'd get at least 100,000 miles out of it when at the time, gas engines were breaking down with half that mileage.
So I am no mechanic, Dad, you know that, but let me just throw out one of the key differences between a diesel and a gasoline engine and why a diesel is generally more reliable. Diesels run on compression ignition. There is no spark that has to go off to light up that fuel mixture, and therefore the engine just constantly wants to keep on running because you don't need that electrical component added in like you do a gas engine. Now there's a longer explanation than that, but that is the very basics of why a diesel just wants to go and go and go, and why a gas engine is just more complex and therefore slightly less reliable.
Oftentimes, when we talk about reliability, we look at the history of whether it's a truck or whether it's an engine. And in this case, if we look at the longest relationship here with Cummins and First Dodge/Ram, they've put 1.7 million Cummins engines into those trucks since 1989. And when we take a look at Powerstroke, because Ford sells the most trucks, well, when they were together with Navistar, more than 3 million diesels were produced, installed. And since Ford went out on their own in 2011 with their 6.7 liter, 2.5 million engines have been built. Finally, Duramax, late to the party, starting in 2000, but they too have over 2 million engines out there in trucks and running. So the simple fact that you've got this many diesel engines out there and it's a long progression gives you a certain amount of faith in the fact that if you buy a diesel, you're going to get the performance and the longevity that you're paying for. We can't talk about the history of diesel engines without talking about 2008, when the EPA brought out their new targets for emissions, specifically for diesel engines. So this was to cut down on the nitrogen oxide, also soot, and basically to stop them from belching going down the road. So between 2008 and 2011, each brand brought in their DEF, so their diesel emissions fluid systems. These are injection systems which basically take all that dirty exhaust and chemically change them into very nice things like carbon dioxide that plants love and water vapor. So anybody who complains about DEF, I'm going to tell you right now, don't, because it's really been a good thing for the environment. It's one of those things that when people go on about EVs, we can also point and say, listen, diesels now emit water vapor and carbon dioxide, and all the soot and the dirt and the smoke has been eliminated. Unless, of course, you're one of those guys who's deleted
it all.
your truck.
Yeah, no, DEF, I think from a basic consumer point of view, it just looks like an added cost, of course, because it didn't used to be there. But absolutely, it was an actionable item that the government could make and the manufacturers could make right away that made a significant difference.
It created some controversy because the manufacturers on the one hand said that they were getting better mileage. A lot of consumers said they were getting worse mileage. And yeah, you know what? We do have to quickly mention that there's been several different scandals involving cheating, right, by diesel manufacturers to be able to hit the numbers that the EPA established at the same time without killing their performance too much. So without getting into that too deeply, it's out there. There's this push-pull between what consumers want and also how green we want these engines to be, but I still vote for green if I get my say. As far as design is concerned, the Cummins is an inline six-cylinder engine and has been forever, whereas Ford and GM both opted to go with a V8 design. And I guess I lean a little towards the Cummins simply because of how long it's been around. But frankly, the V8 designs as of today, they seem to be working quite well.
So let's end just quickly by talking about the three modern engines, because we've been in all these heavy duty trucks, we have towed with them all, we have experienced them. And like Dad said, there is still that one fundamental difference that the Cummins is an i6. And I will say there's two things to me that sort of stand out about it. The first one is the sound, straight up. I don't think anything sounds better than the Cummins. It's such a unique diesel sound, and I chalk that up to the i6 configuration. And then there is a smoothness to that engine that's not quite there in the V8s. And I won't say it's a massive difference, but there's just something about that inline design. Yeah, it feels better balanced. And so I've always felt like the Cummins just has a little bit, it's not quite as rough around the edges as the other two can be sometimes. Now, on the flip side, I will say we recently had the F-250 limited with the high output, 1,200 pound-feet of torque diesel. The thing is an absolute monster. Like, I will stand here and argue that it's too much power, but I also won't say that it's not incredibly fun to drive, and it's incredibly capable. We put a trailer behind it, and, you barely felt it back there. And actually, the fact that it could accelerate so hard with the trailer, it is unbelievable. It is kind of addictive. So I totally get where Ford is coming from, going to the crazy power numbers. And then the Duramax, you know what? GM is actually the one that in the last 5 years hasn't really been playing the torque wars. They haven't even gotten to 1,000 pound-feet yet. That felt like a pivotal number. Once Ram got there, Ford got there. GM's like 975 is enough. We don't need to keep on pushing those numbers. So they're the one brand not playing the game. In my head, one of the standouts about the GM was always the Allison transmission. There was just something about that transmission where the shift points were good, the logic was so smart. Now, we should mention, talking about Allison, there was a time when the transmission was built by Allison. That changed a couple of years ago. GM brought production in-house, and now they say the transmission is tested and approved by Allison. So it's not built by them anymore, it's built by GM, but they still keep the name on it. But yeah, I do believe that there was an advantage there. There was something about that transmission that just felt super smart to me. But overall, Dad, we can go into little differences all day. They're all incredibly capable these days with the numbers that they're putting out. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And a couple of the key things for those who haven't been in diesel in a long time, the improvements in the common rail fuel injection means that down to like minus 20 degrees Celsius, you don't need to plug that truck in.
For sure.
Used to be back in the day, if you hit freezing, if it wasn't plugged in, you were going to have a hell of a time getting it going. That's all gone. All right. The trucks are smart enough to know how long to preheat, and they just take care of all that. You don't get the smoke, you don't get the belching, and as I always like to say with the modern diesels, the Tim Hortons test. If I can drive through the Tim Hortons and talk to the server on the microphone and she doesn't go, "I can't hear ya." In other words, I don't need to shut the engine off to order my coffee. Yeah, it's fantastic. Sound deadening. They're so much smoother, so much quieter, start easily, and I think a lot of this speaks to the fact that we're not talking about an engine that's been around for 3 years or 5 years or even 10 years. We're talking about 20 years at a minimum, 30, 40 years. So yeah, you know what? They've had so much time to work out the kinks because everybody knows it's not revolution, it's evolution. And they bang away at it year after year after year. So you know what? You really can't go wrong with any one of these today. We just have our own little preferences.
Sure.
But after having just driven the Duramax to Louisiana and back, I was very happy with it. Happy with the transmission, with the power delivery, and just overall performance.
Nice. Well, you know what? I think we're coming to the end of this one. We did touch on a lot, but I think it is important to look at that history because you're right, Dad. Especially these days, it feels like we're getting new engines every 2-3 years. There's some new turbocharged power plant. So it is cool to look at the history and realize that they're still directly related to those old engines, what we have today. And actually, speaking to that too, you can quickly mention with this new crop of HDs, which were all just redesigned, they all just stayed diesel. None of them went hybrid, none of them went hydrogen, any of these other crazy things, because I think the manufacturers know that they have something that's reliable, it works, the infrastructure's there, so don't touch it, especially when it comes to people who work with their trucks. So I appreciate that too, and I think that's a statement on diesel being still the way to go in HD trucks. So yeah, like I said, I think that's it for this one. We want to hear your thoughts. You know, which one of these diesels do you like the most? Which ones have you owned throughout the years? Please let us know down there in the comments below, especially about the reliability. I like people to talk about the reliability of their own trucks, so that if someone scans through the comments, they can get a good sense for it. So share that comment with us. While you're down there, don't forget to mash that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit join to become a member of the Truck King channel, and then come right back here to see what we are testing next. See ya.
Bye now.